My guest today is one of the world's most influential investors. Aged 5, Jim Rogers was selling peanuts for profit. He became a hedge fund pioneer, a commodities trader, and years ago he shifted much of his money, and his family too, out of the US and into Asia. But can even this maverick investor see new opportunities in a world that is riddled with economic uncertainty? Jim Rogers, welcome to Hard Talk.
I am delighted to be here.
Now, it seems to me that you rather enjoy being ahead of the curve, but right now in global economic terms, you're sort of in the middle of the curve because everybody agrees that Asia is the place to be. Does that make you feel a little uncomfortable?
Well, everybody agrees, but most people aren't acting on that. It's something they talk about, but until there's a flood of immigrants into Asia, it's still early.
Well, it's not so much about the immigrants, it's about the money, isn't it? And the money is talking. The money is moving from the Western economies into China.
Money is moving into all of Asia. The largest creditor nations in the world now are China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. The money's there. You know who the debtors are, and you know where they are.
And then we'll talk about the debtors, but let's stick with the creditors and let's stick with Asia. Your career tells everybody that there is no such thing as a one-way bet because you've tried to predict, based really on where you see value, where the value might be added. But coming back to this point about Asia and its rise, are you sure that you don't see Asia as a one-way bet? You've sort of predicted that you're going to be there for the long term.
I will, but Stephen, there are going to be huge setbacks in Asia in the future. In America, we had a horrible civil war in the 19th century. We had 15 depressions with a D. We had no human rights. You could buy and sell, you can still buy and sell congressmen in America, but they were cheap in the 19th century. America had massacres in the streets. We were a wreck, and yet we had a great 20th century. All of that's going to happen in Asia. I don't know what or when. They'll have plenty of setbacks.
Yeah, but that sounds a little bit like complacency. When you say even if there is some sort of hard landing, some sort of even real depression in the Asian economies, you'll see that simply as a reason to buy more stocks, to invest more in Asia. You're sounding like a man who's sort of drunk the Kool-Aid, who refuses to see the downside risk.
I just said they're going to be huge downside. They're going to be serious problems.
Well, a serious investor should, at times, respond by pulling out some of his money.
Well, wait a minute. Where am I going to put it? In the United States? The UK? They're bankrupt. Why would I take my money out of a place which is having a dip and put it into a bankrupt nation? And by the way, I can always sell things short if I see problems coming, and I hope I'm smart enough to do that.
But you're not going short in Asia, are you? And some people suggest you probably should be. I mean, Nouriel Roubini, for example, just in the last few days has been writing about his serious concerns about Asia, suggesting in his words that there is going to be a hard landing for China.
Well, I have shorts, and if that happens, I have shorted emerging markets stocks, places like India. So yes, I'm prepared. I hope I'm prepared. We'll find out. I've also shorted technology stocks in the U.S. You can ask me in 2 years, and we'll see if I got it right or not.
But I'm not, in a way, talking about 2-year spans. I'm not talking about the success of individual investments. I'm looking at structural problems. I mean, if you look, for example, at the Chinese property market, to many experts, it looks like a very serious bubble. I mean, prices in cities like Shanghai and Beijing are unsustainable.
And to me, there is no question that there is a property bubble in urban coastal real estate in China. But that's not China. That's not the whole economy. It's much broader than that. Yes, you're going to see Chinese real estate speculators going broke. I assure you of that.
And that's going to have a massive impact on the wider economy because we know that, well, we know from rating agencies like Fitch that there are a lot of banking institutions in China, local banks, other lending institutions, which are in hock to the property market, and they will suffer.
Stephen, you worry me. You're bad for my nervous system when you're talking about Fitch and rating agencies. Those are the people who've totally fouled up in the past 10 years, and you're listening to them. Yes,
so
they're
whatever
going to be
Cassandra
problems.
warnings there are about what's happening in China, you just will ignore them.
No, they're going to be problems. Hear me out. I said you're going to see real estate speculators going broke. But that's not the Chinese economy. In America, you could buy 5 houses with no job, no money down, and then the bankers took those mortgages and turned them into even more magic, more debt, in other words. That's not happening in China. You can't buy 2 houses with no job. You can't buy 1 house with no job and no money down. It's an entirely different kind of situation.
All right, well, let me see if I can pierce your optimistic armor with a different set of arguments. Look at environmental issues. Look at, for example, the chronic long-term shortage of water in China. Now, that is something which no amount of confidence about their economic management is going to solve.
I don't mind if China has civil war, epidemics, panics, depressions, all of that. You can recover from that. The only thing you cannot recover from is water. You are exactly right. China has a horrible water problem in the north. India has a worse water problem. There's no question about that. America in some places has water problems. If China doesn't solve its water problems, then there's no China story. There you're exactly right. I've been around the world a couple of times. I've seen whole societies, cities, countries that disappeared when the water disappeared.
And how, given the optimism you've expressed so far in this interview, how do you think China is going to overcome its environmental problems, starting with water?
They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. You and I are not the only ones who know they have a water problem. They're spending staggering amounts of money trying to solve their water problem. I am presuming that they will. Now, maybe they won't. And if they won't, in 20 or 30 or 40 years, the whole story's over.
Well, and it's not just water, it's also demographics. In the words of the Wall Street Journal the other day, after the latest demographic figures out of China, they described a demographic trend that threatens to sap the country's economic vitality. Basically, there are now too many old people in China and not enough young people.
Right. Well, we have other examples. Japan is in worse shape, much worse shape. As you know, Japan has a declining population for the first time in history. Italy, Spain, there are a few countries which have serious demographic problems, including China.
Sure,
There's no question
these
about
are all,
that.
if one can be frank about it, sort of sunset economies in the global perspective.
Yes.
And you're telling me that the emerging economies of Asia, led by China, are the 21st century future. And I've just given you a host of arguments which suggest that optimism may be wildly misplaced.
Yes. But please, do not get me wrong. There are going to be problems in China. Don't think that I'm some kind of cheerleader, unrealistic cheerleader. But they're changing their one-child policy. They've modified that a great deal. And I am presuming there are a lot of offshore Chinese who will come back in the future as China continues to develop, as I suspect it will. There are going to be problems. But I don't see any other country on the horizon which will be the most important country in the 21st century. It's not going to be the UK. It's not going to be the US. It's not going to be Denmark.
Well, we'll talk about the Western economies in a moment and why you're so convinced that they are not the future, they represent the past. But let's stick with Asia and the impact of the Asian economic growth story for a moment longer. You're a speculator, in part. I mean, that's how you make money. One of the areas that you've speculated a lot of your own and your clients' money in is commodities. A commodities boom driven by emerging Asian economies more than any others. Do you see that continuing?
Well, there's no question about that, but it's not just demand from Asia.
Well, there is a question about it continuing, because
in
some
your
people
mind,
believe that we're right now at the peak of a commodities boom and that the only way now is down.
Well, there certainly could well be setbacks. There's no question about that. Nothing goes straight up. Everything goes up like that. Most things go up like that. But, Stephen, we have a shortage of agriculture in serious proportions. It's an epidemic. The average age of a farmer in America is 58 years old. The largest group of suicides in the UK is farmers, because the sector, because farming has been such a horrible business. Hundreds of thousands of Indians commit suicide farmers commit suicide every year. Farming has been a disaster, and unless something happens very quickly, we're going to have no food at any price in a few years. This is a huge problem facing the world.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the price of food and you link it to the suicides of farmers, because other people get suicidal when the price of food goes up. That is, very poor people who can't afford to eat. Are you comfortable making a lot of your money at the moment out of speculation in agricultural commodities?
Stephen, if the price of food doesn't go up, we're not going to have any food at any price. Somebody has to invest in agriculture. Let me repeat. The average age of farmers in America is 58 years old. Nobody goes into agriculture.
You did make that point, but I'm not talking about the simple laws of supply and demand. I'm talking about middlemen. I'm talking about about people who now specialize in trading in agricultural commodities, and not just in commodities, but in derivatives and complex instruments as well. Do you feel that that is a business you can get into with a clear conscience?
Well, absolutely, because if the price doesn't... Look, I know you want to sit here in London and have cheap pate and cheap champagne while the poor farmers are out there 12 hours a day in the hot sun starving to death. But that's not justice, if you ask me. That's outrageous, in fact. I would prefer for somebody to help the farmers drive the... Why don't you ask the farmers? Well, they want the price to go higher so that they can make money, so that they can attract capital, so that they can attract young people into the business. Otherwise, we're not going to have any food.
Well, as it happens, I come from farming stock, but it's not so much a story about UK farming stock. It's about farmers in the poorer parts of the world. And I think they have seen the rising price of world agricultural commodities, and they've wondered, where's all this money going? Because it isn't coming to me. There does seem to be a thriving business in this sort of third-party trade in commodities, food commodities, which isn't benefiting the farmer himself.
Well, that may be true the first 6 months, even the first year or so, but I assure you, ultimately, it gets down to the farmer. That's the way the world works. Of course.
Well, why are there so many poor farmers when the prices of foodstuffs are going through the roof?
Food prices are below where they were 30 years ago in many cases. Food prices are below where they were 20 years ago. Food prices are very depressed. I mean, sugar prices are 70% below where they were in 1974. That's not a typo, Stephen. 70% below where they were in 1974.
Well, this isn't a typo either. The words of Olivier de Schutter, the UN rapporteur on the right to food, who recently said rising prices of wheat, maize and rice are not linked to low stock levels or poor harvests. They're linked rather to traders reacting to information and speculating on markets.
Well, some of the information is that there's no inventory. I don't know where he gets his numbers, because the FAO says that the inventories of food are among the lowest in historic times. What's he talking about? Well, if he knows where there's a lot of wheat... Wait, Stephen, if he knows where there's a lot of wheat and a lot of rice, he should bring it to the market. He should sell it. He should drive the price down if he's got all this rice.
It's not just him, is it? It's politicians the world over are worried about this. Nicolas Sarkozy has asked for the G20 to have a special meeting about what is happening in the market for wheat and other grains, and that meeting is going to take place in June. I just wonder if you're worried that your sort of business is going to suffer if new regulations come in.
Stephen, I know that they're going to bring in new regulations. I know they're going to say it's the evil speculators. Politicians have been doing this for a few thousand years. They always blame their problems on somebody else. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to bring in regulations. You know what it's going to do? It's going to make the situation worse. Because unless the prices go higher, are you going to go into the fields and work 12 hours a day in the hot sun for nothing so that I can have cheap pate? Not me, but so Sarkozy can have cheap pate and sit there with cheap champagne in Paris? No, you're not going to do it. Nobody is. So he's going to make the situation worse.